Okay, last time we left off, we had cropped out as much of the 3D model as possible without interrupting too much detail. And the next step is really going to clean this up manually, especially these small blood vessels and any bones that are touching the femur. So in some areas, we'll see that, for example, some pieces of the hip bone and even the patella are actually touching the femur because in real life, that joint space may be extremely narrow in some parts. Before you do this, if you're not familiar with femur and hip anatomy, I would strongly encourage you to look it up both in an anatomy textbook or on a website like Radiopedia so you can get an idea of what these relevant bones look like in real life. So another thing I also want to point out is the tools we have over here. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see I'm hovering over what's called, let's reselect it here, the paint tool. You can see it's selected here. This is a brush that can either be as a slice. Here, let's see. Where can we see that? So here you see it's just kind of a round circle. It's not a, it's not 3D. It's just as wide as the scan slices are themselves. You could change the size here in the diameter selection. And you can also change it so it's a sphere. So if you are somewhere, like say you're editing a blood vessel and you feel comfortable in your 3D space, you can go ahead and just delete that using a sphere instead of these tiny slices. Sorry, you can paint, but you can actually do the same thing with the erase tool, which is just really the inverse of the paint tool. You can make it a sphere or you can make it a thin slice by selecting and deselecting this. I haven't really found the rest of these tools useful in the editing process, except for when we get to the end, you're going to be interested in using the operators tool, logical operators here to copy the slices when you want to delete one femur and keep the other, and the smoothing tool if it's looking a little bit choppy. But for now, let's just focus on something simple, which would be deleting the blood vessels. So I find this really easy to do in the axial view. So we're going to zoom in on here. And how do we know something is a blood vessel? Here, it's where going into the anatomy is important. So we know the popliteal vessel runs behind the knee. And in this patient, probably the reason they got a CT runoff is it's a very similar density to the bone, and it probably has calcium in it, which is why it looks the same. And it was selected by the threshold tool. And you can see it runs along the entire length of the leg. It fades in and out at some places where the density is a little bit different, and you see these other little blood vessels. And here in the middle, the cortex of the bone with the marrow cavity is very clear. And you can see higher up in the pelvis, we have the iliac vessels. So knowing your anatomy will be very helpful here, and knowing what a femur looks like will be very helpful here. So let's start just by deleting these iliac vessels. And this is a good area where we could use the 3D function because this is large enough that I feel pretty comfortable deleting it in the 3D space. And you can even zoom in. I'm using the pinch and zoom tool here on my laptop to kind of see where you are in space and make sure you're not deleting anything. So if you ever get too close and too uncomfortable, you can see in the 3D space where you actually are. So let's take that tool. It's set to sphere. I feel comfortable deleting this here. I'm not even near the femur yet. And this is part of the iliac bone. I feel good deleting that. But as you see, a couple slices lower, we start to see the beginning of the femur. So this is somewhere where I'm going to want to switch to the flat tool, where I'm only deleting it slice by slice. So let's swipe here, swipe here, swipe here, swipe here. Can even zoom in a little bit. And you can even zoom down and kind of get a view of when am I going to see this femur bilaterally. So here, this one is really far away. So let's go back and use the sphere brush here. And you can see I'm deleting when I use the sphere a couple slices at a time. So I'm saving myself scrolling a little bit. Same, in this section, it's probably fine to do that. So let's look at what that looks like in a 3D model. What did we just do? You can see right here, we're able to comfortably, this is the vessel we are deleting right here, and it's pretty far away from the femur. but you can already see where it almost looks like the hip bones kind of melted on to the head of the femur in this scan. So I will, once we delete more of these extra pieces we don't want, I can show you kind of how to use the sphere tool to recreate the femur and make it look nice and spherical. So just kind of looking through, looking at my anatomy, seeing what I'm going to want to keep and what I'm going to delete. So now I'm just going to mute myself for a little bit, clean this up, and speed up the video so in the interest in time. Okay, so we've cleaned up the hip bones a little bit, and you can see right here, it looks like it should be the head of the femur, but you know that everything is such a similar color and density that the threshold tool wasn't quite able to pick it out. So we're going to clean up this a little bit more and just kind of delete everything that we would imagine would be not the femur. You can try using the threshold tool here, which kind of just selects the closest uniform color, and it fills it in a little bit, but it's not quite perfect. Same here, we can fill in that little gap. So let's look at what this looks like in 3D. It definitely looks a little strange. So how can we kind of recover from, oh, this looks really weird, it's flat on top. What you can do is you can zoom in to kind of triangulate this in space. So let's move to see where that femur is. Use your sphere tool, and you can kind of see where that sphere would be in this view. And you can just slightly adjust until you're really in the middle of what you would imagine would be the hip. And then you can increase the size of the sphere until it looks like approximately what the femoral head would be. So how do I want to know if I'm in the middle here? Can actually move. The other one looks like it might be a little bit of a better candidate for this tool. So let's move to the contralateral side. So we can put ourselves in the widest part here and the middle here of the femoral head. Change our sizing a little bit. That's too big, maybe down one, and perfectly center. And if we just click, we are adding back to make that kind of a perfect sphere. So you can go ahead and continue deleting these hip bones and everything. Like say, if I accidentally just erase this chunk here, my femur's missing. You can use that sphere tool and make sure you know where you are in space and add back that segment you deleted very carefully. And be aware that when you do this, it's not going to be 100% anatomically correct, but since we're interested in diaphysis shaft fractures, that's okay because we're not actually dealing with this segment. It just makes it look nice, and it's going to help the software identify what a femoral head looks like, even if it's not 100% anatomically accurate. So I'm going to continue to use the erase tool to clean this up. You're going to want to go here and clean up some blood vessels. And another tricky part I just want to draw attention to is when you're finding the end of the femoral condyle and when does it really become the tibia. So you can see here there's a gap in the middle. That's probably the end of the condyle, but the first thing I like to do is scroll all the way down to when I'm certain I'm in the tibia and then work my way back up. And we can even see, so that is the patient's right. So I can see where my eraser is. Go even further. Just kind of look at what I'm erasing and make sure I'm not erasing anything that I really want to keep. So continue to scroll up. That's still definitely the tibia. Still definitely tibia. And now I'm starting to question myself, like, oh, is this tibia or is it going to be femur? So we can even try to orient ourselves so we are looking at the bottom here. It's really helpful if you have pinch and zoom on your computer because it's a little more intuitive. And I can see where I am in space. So I think at right about here, I'm probably comfortably out of the femoral condyle. So I'll erase everything from here down. You can see here, there's still some artifacts. I even need to kind of erase in the middle because we know the condyle has a gap in the middle. It starts to look a little bit clearer when I get that excess material out. It doesn't quite gain its butterfly shape until maybe about here. I can even zoom in further. I'll continue to clean this up. I would say that in the middle there. And again, if I delete a little bit too much, I can go back and use the threshold tool to kind of capture that little piece there and refill in that segment. And now I feel like maybe I deleted a little bit too much and I want this back. So I will add this. Look at my scan. Maybe add this segment as well. And then you really just have to continue to clean this up and use trial and error. I know it's a very tedious process. This can take several hours per scan, but it will get easier with time and learning the anatomy and learning to navigate the system. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up the rest of this quietly. And once we've erased everything in the model that is extra, we will go over how to separate this into different object files. So we have bilateral femur, left femur, and right femur.